Welcome once again to the Upper Room. Great to be with you. Thanks for joining us. There's an old story about some young guys that broke into a department store in Philadelphia years ago, not to steal anything, but to simply rearrange all the price tags on everything in the store. And they did that as a prank, left. The next day when the store opened, you can imagine the mayhem, the chaos that took place as fur coats were going for $5.50 and things that should be very inexpensive were incredibly expensive. And it wasn't long before they realized we've got to shut this store down and put all the price tags back. It's a fun story. I believe it's a true story. But the point is this. What is a price tag? I mean, why was that a great prank? Well, it was a great prank because the price tag is a label that assigns value to something. Be it of great value or of very little value, it really doesn't matter. That's the importance of a price tag. When you're shopping, that is one of the first things you look for, right? If something catches your eye enough for you to look at it, you very soon will go to the price tag. Most people will anyway. I guess some people don't. But it's that idea of assigning value. And so we're going to talk about that because everything in this life has value. It may be of great value, it may be of little value, but in reality, the value of whatever it is we're talking about is up to the individual to decide, right? Things that are of great value to me may be of very little value to you. Many years ago, probably clear back in 1993, I had the opportunity to go on the sidelines of an NFL game. I actually got to do that a couple times. I had met a guy by the name of Greg, who was the official photographer for the Arizona Cardinals football team. And so I had the opportunity to go with him on the sideline up in Seattle when they played there in the Kingdome. And there was another time as well. I'll never forget, though, as we went onto the sideline, I brought a football with me, and he asked me, why did you bring the football with you? And I said, because I want to get it autographed by a guy by the name of Rick Mirer, had been drafted that year from Notre Dame. They thought he would be the next Joe Montana. And so I thought, this is my chance to get an autograph. At that point in my life, autographs of sports celebrities was a big deal to me. That was of high value to me. And so when I told Greg I'm going to get this football autographed, he said, well, you better be careful because we're not really supposed to be doing that, but I'll let you go ahead and do that. So I carried his other cameras and we were on the sideline the whole time. At the end of the game, as I walked across the field, I came face to face with the great Rick Mirer. Now, to tell you the truth, his NFL career was a bust. Even though he was drafted number 2 in the NFL draft, it was an absolute bust. But at that time, I thought this will be a valuable autograph. And so he was kind enough to stop and sign it. Remember, I have a sideline pass on that said media on it. As soon as he signed it and walked away, a guy from the Seattle Times, the photographer from the Seattle Times, walked up to me and just ripped me a new one. He said, you know you're not supposed to be doing that down here. He said, you stay here. I'm going to go get security. Immediately, I looked around and found Greg and said, Greg, I'm in trouble. They're going to kick me out. He goes, well, let's go. Let's get out of here. I've never forgotten that story because it really is about what's valuable. What was valuable to me was potentially great autographs. And again, that was just a period of my life when that was a big deal. I was actually getting them for our oldest son, Ty, when he was very young. And yet to this guy from the Seattle Times, what was valuable to him was this privilege, all right? And it was a great privilege to him to get to be on the sideline, obviously, and he was amongst a very privileged group of people who get to stand on the sidelines of NFL games. And he felt as though I was endangering that privilege. And so what was valuable to him was not valuable to me, and what was valuable to me was not valuable to him, and we had to beat feet out of there. So for some, value has to do with a status or a signature, something like that. Most of you will remember Jay Leno. He's still on TV once in a while. Jay Leno was a comedian in the 70s and the 80s. And then he got his break when he got on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson for several years. And he actually took Johnny Carson's place as the late night host. The king of late night is what he was. He seems to be a great guy, his values and everything. He's been married for over 40 years. They've had no children, so that was not of great value to them to have children. But can you guess what is of great value to Jay Leno, the comedian, the TV star? He lives in Burbank near Hollywood. Do you know what's of great value to him? How many cars, I'm talking luxury cars, do you think he owns? You can Google it, but he owns, at least at last count, 352 luxury cars. That's what's of great value. The value of his array of automobiles comes to, ready? $52 million. Can you imagine putting $52 million in automobiles? It's pretty obvious what's of great value to Jay Leno. Now, what's of great value to him is not of great value to me. We run around in our Toyota Sienna like it's the greatest thing ever. We parked, by the way, on our trip, we parked next to a Porsche, and the owner of that Porsche said, "So, you're sporting a minivan, huh?" And I was so proud to tell him about our minivan. But I am no Jay Leno because he's funny and I'm not. More than that, I will never have $52 million. And if I did, I would certainly never spend it on over 300 automobiles and motorcycles. All right, so my question to you, it's a discussion question right off the bat. What is of great value to you? And you might throw in what is of not great value, as I've just described in my life. What are the things, what are the maybe positions, what are the things of great value to you? What is it that's not of great value to you? And let me remind you, it'd be really easy here to talk about the things that you want people to think are of great value to you. The things that are of great value to us, we know they are because we spend money, time, and energy on those things. So keep that in mind. Be honest now. What is of great value to you? And if you're not sure, look at what you're spending most of your money, time, and energy on. Have a great discussion. So we're in this series we're calling The Lucky Ones, a study of the Sermon on the Mount, and we've just come through 3 different illustrations Jesus used of spiritual activities, spiritual disciplines, if you will, and he used them not to highlight them and say, you need to do this. Instead, it was a big-time warning about selfish ambition and how even spiritual practices can be a cover for selfishness and the pursuit of selfish ambition. Okay, we've just come out of that, and believe it or not, he's going to stick with the same theme, but now it's not really a spiritual discipline, at least that we would recognize. He's going to talk about something that relates to every one of us, no matter who we are, and that is the things that are of great value to us. So we're going to pick it up in Matthew 6, verse 19. We'll eventually go all the way through verse 24. Let's start right there in verse 19. Here we go. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. Okay, so let's start with what Jesus says at the very beginning of that passage, and that is do not. This is a warning, it's a command, and then he does something really interesting. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Okay, here's what's cool. The phrase store up or lay up, it might be in your translation, and the word treasures are the same word. They come from the same word, and it's a Greek word from which we get the word thesaurus. Ever read a thesaurus? You know what a thesaurus is? It's a treasure of words. It's a book of treasury of words. So the idea is value. All right, so a thesaurus has value in that it has so many words that mean so much. But Jesus here uses a really cool play on words. He uses this word as both a noun and a verb. He starts with the verb, do not thesaurus your thesauruses. Do not store up, do not treasure, do not value the things that this world values, is what he's saying. Now, are we guilty of that? Oh my goodness, you know we are. We know this is really a message for all of us, that we store up. We have these boxes, they could be any size boxes, that we put our valuables in, all right, our thesauruses in, and we put them in there and we lock it, and it's called a what? A safe. It's called a safe. Why? Because I got to keep this stuff safe. My other stuff you can have, but this stuff has to be safe. All right, so Jesus says, don't do that. Don't do that. This is tough for us, isn't it? This is quite a conundrum, because the very thing Jesus says we are not to do, we tend to do. Now here's what I want you to notice. Don't misunderstand what Jesus is saying. Jesus doesn't say you can't acquire things that you value. He's just saying don't stockpile the things you value. For yourself is the idea. Why? Well, he gives us the reason that we'll feel a sense of demise in this whole thing, and we'll get to that. But I want to prove to you that he's not against us having things that we value and appreciate. Let me take you to 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, where Paul is writing about people who put their hope in God. He says they put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Did you get that? The things that God has given you, the things he's given us, he wants us to enjoy. All right? So you think, well, he just said we can't store up things. Yes, but you can enjoy what he gives you. Another passage from James 1:17, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights. Okay, so every gift, everything you've been given that is good, truly good, comes from the Father. Why? Because the Father is good, you're his child, and he wants you. He wants us to enjoy the things we have. The warning, however, remember, is do not store up for yourself. Do not stockpile. Why? The first reason he gives for the demise of that kind of a practice is what we would call the second law of thermodynamics, or the law of entropy. So we'll get to that, but I want to ask you one more discussion question. What are the practices, do you think, that we have in our modern world that really tend to lend themselves to us stockpiling and protecting and making sure nobody can get them? And maybe they're the same practices that Jesus would say, that's what I'm talking about. What practices are those? Talk about that. Okay, so what's the why behind this? Obviously, storing up for yourself is a selfish thing, kind of like the illustrations he just gave us about selfishness. However, there's some real practical reasons he gives us for the demise of such a practice, where moth and rust, or some translations say vermin, destroy, thieves break in and steal. One is nature, the other is the nature of man. That's bringing us to our setting here, at least for a little bit. This wagon behind us is valuable only in the sense of it looks cool. That's it. When it was created, it had great value, right? It carried things that were important. It can no longer do that. Why? Because moth and rust, especially rust, destroys this kind of thing, all right? And you have examples of this in your life. Things have just deteriorated. Second law of thermodynamics. It's the way it works. Long before we came up with that phrasing, Albert Einstein, I believe, came up with that concept, Jesus talked about it. Things deteriorate. So if we can store them up, they're eventually going to deteriorate one way or another, whether it's through rust, or in those days, people's wealth was displayed in what they wore, in their clothes. They would put gold in their clothes to show how wealthy they were, and much of the clothing was made out of wool, and thus the moths would destroy it. Even the coolest clothing, which was meant to tell people how wealthy they were, would be eaten away. And then, so that's nature. And then there's the nature of man, and that is, the nature of man is, we have thieves amongst us, right? Who break in and steal. They will take it. It will get taken at some point, is the idea. Jesus says, that's why you don't want to make your life about those things. Some of you know when it comes to thieves, you've had thieves in your home or in your car. There's another kind of thievery, as you know. This year so far, the stock market has dropped 25%. Money you thought you were storing up for yourself is disappearing, all right? Jesus is always right. He's always right. You see, we have things that we treasure that are representative of success, and we don't realize the very way we get to that place of success is also our demise. Chuck Swindoll once put it this way: the only trouble with success is that the formula for achieving it is the same as the formula for a nervous breakdown. So that's what Jesus is warning about. Now, it's possible that thieves not only will break into your home or your car and steal things, but the stock market or the IRS, your stuff that you think is yours, that you're preserving, will get taken, Jesus says. So Jesus, again, is right about everything. It happens that way. And so his warning is, this is not a good way to live, to care so much that you are going to protect for yourself what you have. So Jesus drives the point home about the demise of storing up things for yourself by telling the very famous parable in Luke chapter 12 of the man who had plenty but decided, I need more, and he built bigger barns. Remember, we've called this the bigger barn syndrome. And he builds bigger barns, more barns, to store more for him so he'll never run out. He can relax. And he does that, and after he's built more barns and has more surplus in store waiting for him, he sits back and says, now I'm happy, now I'm content. And then Jesus says in verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Verse 21, Jesus says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. See, Jesus said it in the Sermon on the Mount, and now he illustrates it. And that's really difficult for us to buy into, right? Because we want to believe that the smart thing is to just keep accumulating and storing up things so that we'll never run out. We'll always be safe because we have it in a safe place. And Jesus' point again is there is demise in that kind of thinking. It is never safe. And even when you think it's safe, your life will be demanded of you and someone else will get to play with what you stored up, is the idea behind it. All right, now Jesus transitions. He starts with, don't do this. I'm telling you, don't do it. There's very natural reasons. And then there's a supernatural reason. That is, my Father will demand your life. At the very moment you think you can sit back and enjoy things. Now he transitions, chapter 6, verse 20. But instead, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and rust do not destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Discussion question: what do you get from the phrase, store up for yourselves in heaven? And so we know that if we go about life the way most of us want to go about life, and that is storing up for ourselves on earth, earthly things we value here, there is demise in that. Now we have a decision to make because Jesus presents another option. Now Paul writes about this other option and says, this storing up for yourselves in heaven, that's a difficult concept. I don't know how you did in your discussion question, but how do you do something that is invisible, right? So here we go. It's 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. Command those who are rich in this present world, okay, those who have a lot here, that's you and me, by the way, to not be arrogant, nor should they put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. Where does that come from? It comes from the teachings of Jesus that we just covered. It's as though Paul is going, let me give you a refresher on this, all right? So he goes on. But to put their hope in God, not the riches, who richly provides everything for our enjoyment. Okay, we read part of that before. There's more. Command them to do good. It's as though Paul is saying, this is how you pay it forward, is that you do good here on this earth, and it'll be credited to you in heaven. He goes on. And to be generous and willing to share. We've talked about the importance of generosity. Okay? That, through our generosity, is storing up yourselves in heaven. In this way, they will lay up treasure. There's that phrase, treasure, treasure. Value the valuable. They will lay up treasure for themselves. Again, that phrase, for themselves, as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Think about what life really matters, Paul says, the truly life. What I have here on earth is for others, and it would be wise for me to figure that out. Now I want to go to 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 5 in the Message. Listen to this. What a God we have, and how fortunate we are to have him. This Father, our Master Jesus. Because Jesus was raised from the dead, we've been given a brand new life and have everything to live for, including a future in heaven. All right? Start focusing on what the real life will be like, not this life. And the future starts now. Start this now, Peter says. Don't wait till you're almost dead. Start now thinking about the future. God is keeping careful watch over us and the future. Watch this. The day is coming when you'll have it all. Life, healed and whole. What a promise. The day is coming. I got to tell you, remind you, the day is coming when you'll have it all. I was talking to a friend just this week saying, yeah, there's just this part of me that wants it all. And we do, right? Peter says you can have it all if you'll be thinking about how this life will affect the next life, and you'll experience God's blessing here, but more importantly, you are putting it ahead. You are storing ahead, and there is really wholeness and healing that will take place in the next life. Okay, so you get the point. Jesus says, don't do this. Here's some logical reasons, a spiritual reason as well. And then he says, but you should do this with the same things that you have. Don't store for yourselves here, but store for the future for yourself. See, Jesus isn't saying that in the future you will have nothing. You'll just play a harp on a cloud. He's saying something will be awaiting those of you who figured this out on this earth. Now, when you actually act this way, people will think you're nuts. You know, when you take on the mindset, this stuff I've been given is not mine, people go, I'm going to check you into the psych ward, right? Dallas Willard puts it perfectly. He says, we must be prepared to be treated as more or less crazy unless we value what is on earth as supreme for human existence. He says, people are going to think you're crazy. It's okay. We live for another world. We live for another life. A perfect life. Not the life that we struggle with here on this earth. Okay, so Jesus in verse 19 says, don't do this. Jesus in verse 20 of chapter 6 of Matthew says, but do this. So that's the decision we have to make, all right? He presents two options. Highly recommends the second option. But that leaves us with this dilemma. And the dilemma is this, that whatever we choose will become obvious to everybody. All right? Our choice regarding what is before us with our treasures, the things we value in life, will now become obvious. We can't really keep it secret, and it's quite a dilemma. So he addresses it in verse 21 this way. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Okay. He starts with the treasure. What we value, our heart will follow. And here's the phrase I want you to just grab onto. All right? Our treasure focuses our heart. Whatever it is that's important to me, of great importance, be it an autograph, a privilege, $1 million home, my heart will get focused on that. In other words, the way we view money, possessions, will tell the world the truth about our spiritual life. It'll be the spiritual barometer. And that's quite a dilemma for us, because we would like to kind of pretend like I'm spiritually in good shape, you know, use all the lingo, you know, my father, and I go to church, and I do good things. but how I truly treasure the things on this earth, how I view them, is the spiritual barometer that really tells God, and I know is the truth about who I really am. That's a dilemma for us, right? Because we can't pretend. You know, we can't just pray and fast and give and all that kind of stuff. And yet, how we view everything in this world, all right? Maybe it's cars. I love cars. Or I love vacations. The things I value the most expose me for who I am. Expose me for who I am in my heart of hearts. One of my favorite movies is The Last Crusade, Indiana Jones, where Sean Connery plays the father of Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford. And all throughout the movie, they have this, this kind of bantering back and forth because his dad always wants to call him Junior. And Indiana's a professor now, and so he wants to be called Indiana or Professor Indiana or whatever. And his dad refuses to do it. He refuses to call him by the name he wants to be called. And so they go on this quest, first separately and then they come together, for the Holy Grail, for the vessel, the cup that Jesus drank out of at the Last Supper. Because it is believed in this story, probably some people really believe it, that cup, you drink out of that cup, you can have eternal life, you can have healing, you can have all these things. Okay, so that's the story. At the very end, they found the cup and they have it, but they have crossed a part of this cave that they weren't supposed to cross, a seal, and this earthquake, huge earthquake hits, and they lose the cup, and it's out on a ledge. And this girl that's with him, this lady that's with him, she's only cared about that cup, and she goes after the cup and falls, and she disappears. And now the earthquake hits again, and Indiana slips and falls, and he's holding onto the ledge, and his dad is there kneeling beside him, but the cup is just out of his reach. And so he lets go of the ledge, and his dad grabs his other hand, and he's reaching for that cup, having just watched that lady fall into the abyss. But it's that cup that he so values, and so he's reaching, it's just out of his reach, and his dad just says, let it go, just let it go. And then in this cool moment, he addresses him as Indiana. He addresses him by the name that Indiana loves to hear. Indiana, grab my hand. And it's such a great picture because he has this decision. I want so much to have this, and I want you too, Father, but I want this so badly that I'm willing to risk my life for it. And at some point his father says, let it go. Okay, this is quite the dilemma for you. Let it go, grab my hand. And in essence, why I love that scene is because that is exactly us. We are constantly reaching for more. If I just could have more for myself. And the Father says, give me your other hand. Put both hands in my hand and trust me. I will take good care of you. So I love that scene. And it's really interesting that it's obvious to everybody else that we have this dilemma that we're struggling with. For example, Paul is writing the last letter he'll write before he's beheaded in Rome. And in 2 Timothy, he's talking about the real practical things. Timothy, could you bring me a coat? It's getting cold here, in Rome, or whatever the case may be. And then he says this about a guy named Demas. Listen to it. 2 Timothy 4:10, Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Listen to that phrase, because he loved this world, because he chose the cup. He chose the most valuable thing to him. He was with me. He did ministry with me. We journeyed together. I thought we were close. He, in the end, chose. His answer to the dilemma is, I will choose to store up for myself the things of this world. Even Paul could tell what he had done with the instructions of Jesus. Sorry, Jesus, the dilemma's too much. Not going to do it. I'm going to go after what suits me best here and now, not in the future. Viktor Frankl, we've quoted before, was a psychologist, I believe, during World War II, and he was put in a concentration camp, and he survived it. And he watched closely the nature of people under stress in the concentration camp in World War II. And then he said this before he passed away, We who lived in the concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of his freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That's what Jesus is saying. I offer you two ways. I'm going to bluntly tell you which way works. But you still have the choice. And we come to the early church in Acts chapter 2, verse 42. And we've read this before. Listen to it again. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they had. They made a choice. In the dilemma, what should we do in these difficult times? Because they were difficult times in the early church. What did they choose to do? All that I have is not mine. I freely share it. And that's what Jesus is saying. In doing that, you lay up for yourselves the valuable things in the next life. Now, having said that, I believe that most of us in this world and many of us in the church are defiant. When it comes to the words of Jesus, we read them, and there's a lot of things that Jesus says that we say, oh yeah, I'm in, count me in, I'm with you. But this is one, and I love this because our oldest grandson, this is his favorite verse to quote. It's just one he memorized, he just loves. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy. He loves that verse, and it's interesting. I pray he always loves it. I pray he loves to obey it. And I pray you love to obey it, because for the most part, as I look around, even in the church, we are a defiant bunch. We're a bunch that says, I think I know better. I think I can have it all. I can store for myself things here and value the things of this earth, and I can find a way to have it great in eternal life as well. So let's talk about this defiance for just a minute. Let me illustrate for you in real practical terms what I mean by the defiance that most of us have regarding Jesus' words here. Last time I checked, there is 1.7 billion square feet of footage of storage available in this culture. Think about how much storage that is. Every time Christy and I go into town, we pass storage units that they keep adding to. They keep building more and more and more. Why? Because Jesus doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. That's why. $39.5 billion is what is taken in for storage units in our society. And I hear you. You're saying, well, those aren't all followers of Jesus. Those aren't all Christians, right? 67% of us claim to be Christians. No, they're not all Christians, but there are plenty of us in the church who have so much stuff we're storing up for ourselves that we've got to rent space to store all the stuff for ourselves. And so we come to this part of Scripture and we go, ew, quite a dilemma. I think I'll just pretend like he didn't say that. So that's what we do with it. So that's pretty obvious. If you have 3 or 4 storage units in addition to your garage and attic, there's a chance you're storing up for yourselves. If you have 30 bank accounts that each have, $100,000 in them or whatever the case may be, just for a rainy day, maybe you're storing up for yourselves. Again, Jesus has no problem with us having things, enjoying things. But it's this idea that I live in fear that someday I may not. And I don't think he is trustworthy when it comes to this. If you're not sure, let's go on with verse 22 of chapter 6, where Jesus says, here's how this happens. So maybe you can kind of dissect whether this is happening in your life. He says this, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, or the word can mean clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy or unclear, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now I can see you saying, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about money. Now you're talking about light and dark. What he's doing here in his incredibly brilliant teaching is he jumps to a metaphor. And the metaphor is this, that light comes into the body in a way we perceive only through the eyes. Okay? Some light can be shown into your ears, but if you can see that light, when it's showing into your ears, or if it goes through one ear and to the other side and it's shining on the wall. There's some problems. Anyway, the point is, this is the only opening where we can perceive light. And so your eyes need to be clear, right? If you have cataracts, you do something to clear them up, is the idea. So he uses that as a metaphor for the heart. Now, what is the heart? When you look at who we are, our being, it all begins, as far as how we function, how we live, with our thoughts. Okay, that's where it all begins. That's why Jesus in Mark 12, when asked about the greatest commandment, said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Mind, he was quoting the Old Testament, but he added mind. Because our entire thought process, how we think, needs to be given to him. Love him with how we think is the idea. So our being starts with how we think, ideas that we have. And then those ideas turn into emotions. And if you don't think that, as you've watched the stock market fall apart, have you had any emotions about that? If you have money stored up in the stock market, of course you have emotion. We just talked to people while we were on our trip about people that have strong emotions about what's happening to all their money in the stock market. Thoughts become emotions. Emotions turn into will. Emotions turn into what thou will do. Okay? I want you to consider all those three things as your heart. It's the center of your being. And your heart really is made up of that whole process. It's who we are at our core. It's not, the hair that's turning gray and the body that's falling apart. That's not who I am. I am at my heart what I think, how I feel, and then what I do, and why I do all that I do. Okay, so that's the heart of who I am. Jesus adds that to live in such a way that you love the Lord your God with all of your heart is the idea. Okay. Having said that, Jesus now uses that as a metaphor. The eyes take in light. That light then gives us perspective. So our perspective on life comes really from what we see primarily and how our heart responds to what we see. And he says, so if the light within you, okay, you're taking in light, you're taking in truth, supposedly, but if that is actually darkness, how dark has your heart become? The point is this. He's talking about perspective. He's talking about focus. That's what he's talking about. What is it you are focused on? This takes us back to how we started, right? The guy I ran into in the Kingdom back in 1993 was focused on his privileges. I was focused on accumulating autographs. Jay Leno's focused on his cars, and it's really obvious to everybody. It is obvious to everybody what you're focused on no matter what you claim or say. So we must be honest about the fact that if my focus is not on the things of God and the things that will last forever, then I'm living in defiance of what Jesus says in Matthew 6. I want to go back to that whole thing about how important it is what we think. The 17th century philosopher, French philosopher, René Descartes put it this way: I think, therefore I am. He really had a point. What I think about, how I think, becomes who I become. And so we've got to pay attention to what we think about. That's why there's so many passages in the New Testament, Colossians 3 and Philippians 4, that say, think on these things. Think about this way. And then those thoughts become what enlightens our hearts or darkens our hearts. But it is what we focus on. We spend time thinking about what our focus is the point. So Jesus' metaphor then really hits home, doesn't it? I can actually tell what is valuable to me. And I can actually tell if I'm in defiance of the words of Jesus, the commands of Jesus, by what it is on which I am focused. So the word there that we read when Jesus says, if the eyes are healthy or the eyes are clear, literally means a single focus. And so the point becomes, what is my single focus? There's a bishop by the name of John Charles Ryle who put it this way: singleness of purpose is one great secret of spiritual prosperity. If I can get focused on the right things, I will prosper in this life, but more importantly in the life to come. So now Jesus, in typical fashion, in case we've missed the point, which you may have been listening for the last many minutes and have missed the point. So in case that's happened, Jesus drives it home in verse 24 when he says, no one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. He's speaking about focus. Is your focus on God and living with God, doing life with God, or is it on the things of this world? He says you can't have it both. Quit reaching for the cup. Reach up and grab his hand is what he's saying. I don't know how it could be any more blunt. And yet, many of us, in defiant fashion, still think we can have it all. We still think we can serve both, ignoring the very words of Jesus. There's a great exchange between Jesus and some people in Luke chapter 12. I want to read it to you. It begins in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Focus? Was it on Jesus? No, I'm going to use Jesus to take care of my focus, the inheritance. What's my inheritance? What is being saved up for me? This person actually thinks that Jesus should do anything he tells him to do. Teacher, tell my brother, to do this. Jesus responds in verse 14, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Of course, Jesus is the ultimate judge, but he's talking about two people who are focused on the things of this world. I'm not getting involved. Jesus says, I'm staying in my lane. That's what he's saying. And then he goes on to say this. If I can find it, we'll tell you what he says after that. Then verse 15, it says that he replied, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." He's saying the same thing. Life is not about how much you can get and keep and hoard and save for yourself on this earth. That's not what life is about. Right here, he challenges this guy whose life is about focusing on what he will get on this earth. In fact, he adds this incredible warning: watch out, be on your guard. Why would I need to watch out and be on my guard? Because that's what comes natural. What comes natural is for me to think about what is mine and how to hold on to it. The great Martin Luther put it this way: whenever the gospel is taught and people seek to live according to it, there are two terrible plagues that always arise: false preachers who corrupt the teaching, and then Sir Greed, who obstructs right livings. He calls them Sir Greed, as though people bow down to greed. And we know that's true. It was true in Martin Luther's day. It's true today. We bow down to Sir Greed, and it obstructs the life God intended for us to live. I want to wrap this up by talking about Robert Robinson, a guy you probably have never heard. Maybe you had a friend named Bobby Robinson, I don't know. But Robert Robinson lived 200 years ago, plus some. He lived in England, and as he grew up, his mom wanted him to become a barber, so she sent him to London to barber school. Okay, they call it something different now, but it was called barber school, I guess. While he was there, he became attached to the teaching of one George Whitefield, the great Methodist revivalist of that time. And as he got sucked into his teaching, he gave his life to Christ. And everything changed about young Robinson's life from that point on. He decided to go into full-time ministry, and he became a star. All right? I mean, everybody loved him. I think his church grew like crazy. He was gifted. It was amazing. But he couldn't handle the fame that came his way, and evidently the wealth that came his way. Because in time, I don't know how many years, he abandoned, like Demas did, he abandoned his calling. He abandoned the work that God had for him. And he went a whole different direction, a direction that led him into worldly living and prioritizing, focusing in on the things of this earth. Okay, so that's the backdrop for Mr. Robinson. I want to pick up the story where he was in a stagecoach traveling somewhere, sitting next to a lady who was just enthralled with this book. She'd read it and she'd turn a couple pages, but then she'd come back to the same page over and over again. And she noticed that he was looking at her, glancing at her, wondering what was on that page that was so important to her. And she said, "Can I read you what's on this page?" And he said, "Well, of course, we're in a stagecoach. Where am I going to go?" And so she began to read to him these words. "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise." He told her, "Stop reading." She said, "No, there's more." He said, "Stop reading." She said, "I got to read the rest of it because you haven't heard the end of it. It's even better." And he said to her, "I do not want to hear that because those are the words I wrote several years ago. And I was such a happier man back then. And it reminds me of the decisions I've made and the wrong path I've taken and how my life does not matter like it used to. I don't want to hear any more." Well, what was it that Mr. Robinson didn't want to hear? The rest of the stanza that he had written? Here it is. "Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let that goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh take and seal it for thy courts above." Listen to that last line. Here's my heart. Here's my being. You keep it safe for the courts above. What is he doing? Here's what's most valuable to me. You are most valuable. You take my life. You take my heart and seal it so that I will get to enjoy it forever. Those are the words he didn't want to hear again, that he had written. See how easily it can happen to us? That we can take the words of Jesus, be enthralled with them, and then in time say, it doesn't really work for me. The most important commandment of God for us is that for the disciple of Jesus, the follower of Jesus, we treasure him. We value him and his realm more than anything on this earth that we could ever have. I pray for you that you will challenge one another in your small community to keep Jesus as the focus. God bless you. What a journey. How lucky are we? Most people walk around on this earth just clueless about what life is about. Not us. We're not clueless. We have the author of life telling us what life really is about. Now the question is only, will you follow him? I pray you will.